Welcome back to What's This Weapon, everybody. I'm Jonathan, and I have an embarrassment of four-barreled pistols in front of me. Most famously, the Lancaster pistol, patented by Thorn, not Lancaster, but it was the Lancaster company. We have a whole video on that you might like to go back and check out. And definitely check out the recent video on this type of pistol from the guys at C and Arsenal. C ampersand Arsenal. It's a play on words. Makes sense if you're American. Excellent channel, excellent video. Really good deep dive. Fantastic 3D animations as to how this sucker works. For our purposes, because we're going to follow up and cover a couple of things they mentioned, it's this side latch opening. Ejector pops up and ejects cases, and inside is a revolving striker with a set of cams cut into a drum that has the striker on the front of it, and it rotates to the next position to fire each shot one after the other. So like a sort of inverse revolver, really, but they explain it better than, frankly, I did last time, and in more detail. This is not particularly relevant, except that it's a Lancaster, and the one I happen to have chosen, because it was in very good condition, has someone's name on it, J. Williams. Unfortunately, we don't know who that person was, but interesting that they would roughly scribe their name into the side of this very expensive pistol. So, going to look at what I was nearly going to call two spin-offs of the Lancaster, but they're not necessarily, well, one definitely isn't a spin-off. One predates the Lancaster by maybe a year as far as the design goes, and that is the Martin pistol up first. Very, very similar, almost identical design to the barrel cluster there, with those flutes that are very much like the flutes on a revolver cylinder to lighten the lump of metal. In this case, it's a cluster of barrels, not a cylinder, but the same principle applies. Very, very similar indeed. Interesting to fully figure out who copied whose homework there, but for the moment we'll focus on the mechanics of it. This is very much a response to the C and Arsenal video, where I've gone excitedly running over to the drawers to see if we have the two pistols that Matthias mentioned in that video as being rivals to the Lancaster. This is the Martin. It has a push button release instead of a lever. Well, it is still a lever, but it's actuated by a push button here. Pops up, opens up. It's very reminiscent of a shotgun bite setup. Probably what it's based on. Same sort of pop-up extractor, but then a very different mechanism inside. You see, it has the four firing pin apertures for the four barrels, of course. Much like the Lancaster, both of these, and the other one I'm coming to is the Bland, by the way, in case you're getting impatient to know what the other one is. Part of my brain was, so that's why I've mentioned it. So we've got the Martin and the Bland. This is the Martin. All three very similar. They're all in, or mostly in, 450 Adams or 476, the standard revolver calibers of the day. There are 380s as well. And you can see on there, we have two markings before we get to the inside of this thing. There's the Martin patent. It's pretty obvious what that means, hopefully. And above that is the logo of the Royal Armouries company. I won't go into the history of that company, but suffice to say they were an arms manufacturing company of the day, and they are the actual makers of this Martin patent design. So it's interesting that that's on the breech face when you pop the thing open. So it's not very obvious. The outside of the gun has nothing but this sort of very nice engraving. It doesn't even have the caliber on this one. It's completely unmarked on the outside, but then when you pop it open, you get Martin patent 16, which I presume is a serial number, although this is the trouble with doing things off the cuff. There is a 74 marked inside the locking catch recess there. But the only hint of the maker and the designer is inside. Now, it's not just the latch mechanism that's of interest here, not by a long way. So let's close that up and put it down, because I have another one opened up ready to show you. So the way this comes apart, if I just pop this open, there are two screws on the breech face, and you undo one, and that side plate then just comes off. So quite a slick and easy disassembly. And inside there is a really fascinating mechanism, completely unlike the revolving striker of Thorn's patent. We have 4 of these, 2 visible on this side, obviously 2 on the other if I undid the other side plate. And they are sprung strikers, but it's a series of tumblers, each positioned in a different angle on the central axis. So it trips one, it cocks and trips one, a bit like a Glock trigger really, only not partially pre-cocked. Cocks and trips one, cocks and trips the next, cocks and trips the third, cocks and trips the last one. So we'll just cycle it through. Don't like to dry fire things, but I think it's worth doing for this purpose while we have a nice clear shot on camera for you. So the first one that's going to fire, you can see me as I pull the trigger. It's a double action style trigger only. You can't pre-cock this thing. So as I pull, you can see the striker tensioning, and then it's released. And that's the top left barrel fired. If we then reset the trigger, broken trigger spring on this one, so I'm assisting it forward. We then see the next one, and it's the one closest me, bottom, so bottom right as you shoot. Then goes, so it's top left, bottom right, and then the third shot is the other one on my side, so the top right barrel then fires, each one with a tumbler that's turning, and the final one will be the bottom one as you see it there, and I can see the striker being withdrawn, under spring tension, pulls it back, not very far, it's not too bad a trigger pull, and then it's released. So that's as much as I want to do to that one without hurting it. So it's a hefty thing as a result of all of that metal and messing about, but it's a really quite a clever system, and I suspect and presume that Thorn had to work around Martin's patent, or possible he didn't care and he just came up with what he thought was a better system with the revolving striker. Now that makes for in theory, for a slightly lighter gun, but I don't really feel the difference in hand. So instead of striker that's eccentrically going between the 4 positions based on a rotating drum that's inside here, we have 4 separate strikers, each one getting drawn back and released as they come around, almost like a clockwork mechanism in a way. Now, it seems Thomas Bland and Sons, who are a separate, entirely separate, as far as I know, gun-making company based in London, on the Strand, they were making these at one time. So the progenitor of this whole, well, not the progenitor, but the first out of the blocks, as it were, seems to have been Martin's tumbler striker system with the 4 barrels, and the basic plan form, as it were, of this loose design seems to originate with him. But I think more research needs to be done there. These guys might have been working in a friendly way with each other. They might have been rivals. But there is a connection here between Martin and Bland. So Martin's design is made by Bland, but later, seemingly, and the dates get a bit obscure here, Bland has his own version. Same basic idea, same basic design. Yet again, we have a different latch mechanism. So it's sort of a cross between the two in that it's a single lever, but it's set up to act like the button on the Martin patent. That strikes me as a patent avoidance thing, but again, someone needs to do some research on this. Which drops the barrels, works exactly the same way for striker holes. You know the drill by now, but what's under here is very different. So I've already loosened the screw. It's not supposed to stick out like that. And then what we need to do is loosen the grip screw as well, which I've also already done. And our grips then drop off. And our side plate then hooks out. So different takedown system, as it were. We'll leave those bits out of the way so you can see what's going on. And intriguingly, Bland has reverted to a revolving striker system. So despite making Martin's pistols for him, maybe the agreement lapsed or something, or maybe even this is what Bland was doing before he embraced making Martin's design. That timeline is not quite clear to me. If you know, please do drop us a comment or an email, because I think we're nearly there, but not quite. But it's much, this is avoiding Thorn's patent, clearly, because the drum, instead of having the sort of Mauser zigzag Webley Fosbury grooves in the drum that then a little peg runs in, check the other videos I mentioned for that, this is a simple ratchet and pull, just like a revolver, but internal to the gun. So you can see, hopefully, as I pull the trigger back and forth, you see the pull rising and falling. There's a hammer that's moving as well, but there's a pull rising and falling there. And if I just pull through on one of them, hopefully you can see how that worked. So the pull engages with the back of the ratchet in the back of the drum and turns it to turn the striker, and the trigger also draws back the hammer and releases it. So it's not as clever, really, at all, as either Thorn/Lancaster or Martin's independent sprung strikers. It's an internal hammer and an internal revolver cylinder. It's just that the revolver cylinder doesn't hold any rounds. The rounds are held in the barrels instead. I hope that makes sense. So really fascinating for me to just respond to somebody else's meticulous research in a much lazier fashion by just seeing what was in the drawers and going, good Lord, we have two of those and we have one of these. Very privileged position that I'm in to be able to do that. But I wanted to share that with you, so I wasn't just going, oh yes, very nice, and moving on to my next task. I wanted to share it with you guys because I thought it was fascinating, and hopefully a bit of an assist to see an arsenal as well, who are friends of this channel, of course, in this museum. So there isn't too much written about these. W.W. Greener, who wrote a couple of very important books in the 19th century on guns, does comment on the Martin, which was known as the mitrailleuse, by the way. I haven't mentioned it so far because there's a different design, a machine gun effectively, called the mitrailleuse. I didn't want to confuse it, but Martin called his design the mitrailleuse. Greener comments on it. So the main concern at the time with revolvers was loss of pressure at the cylinder gap, reducing velocity, reducing power, and also fouling was thought to build up, and with black powder cartridges, maybe, and interfere with the mechanism. And it was thought, at least on a marketing level, that these three designs might obviate that. So that's your niche. So there are British officers who buy these. Matthias quotes a couple of them in his Lancaster video. They're the sort of, arguably the stuck in the past guys that don't want to trust the modern revolver, or they just want to be different and carry something different. And all three fit that bill. Now Martin has this patent in 1880, sorry. Bland, the sort of legally avoiding design, it doesn't have a patent because I don't think it could. I think that was all nailed by other people. So we don't quite have the details on that. We know that the 8 years of production on the Martin mitrailleuse, and then it fades away. Not many sold, we don't know how many, and we know even less about the Bland, just that they are out there. I found one reference on a quick search to an officer with a Bland pistol, but it was a piece of fiction written in the 1920s, weirdly. So even more obscure than the arguably already quite obscure Lancaster, all three of them very cool and have that amazing Victorian aesthetic to them. I'm going to say the steampunk word, even though it doesn't strictly apply. But really nicely made as well, of course. So there's more. Who knew? Not really me. I'd seen these things in the drawer, but I didn't know anything about them until I saw that video. So thanks, guys, for that.